Hello, 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 and welcome back to the forest stage. We have a very special guest, Kyle Burke from Mochi. Come on up. Give him a hand.
Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it.
Talking about iterative DAOvelopment.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Super. So, hello all. My name is Kyle Burke. I'm the co-founder of a agile DAO coordination game called Mochi, where we turn agile into a staked coordination game for you and your members to play within your DAO. What we do is we encourage members to set goals, form teams, share insights, and distribute tokens autonomously. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later. What I'm here to talk about is how we evolve organizations that may very well be the future of work together. And in order to do that, I'm going to be starting by using a lot of references to the human body. And this is because I've been an athlete my whole life in high school and in university. And despite playing at such a high level, I've been dealing with pains and discomforts in my body. It's been, fairly consistent in my life for the past few years. And I've dedicated the past 5 years to studying biomechanics with functional patterns. Biomechanics is the study of the structure and function of biological organisms in order to better understand how I can get myself out of these situations, how I can get myself out of pain and discomfort. And what I've discovered over the years is that there's a lot of interesting crossover. There's a lot that we can learn by looking at organizations through the lenses of the human body. So, as you could tell, my left foot is a little bit different from my right foot. I have a collapsed arch, and my ankle tends to roll inward, and this is one of the symptoms of a greater problem within my system. So one of the first things that I want to introduce you to in relation to the body and organizations is the idea of tensegrity structures. And a tensegrity structure is actually the emerging model of how the human body is organized. Tensegrity structures, like the one you see pictured here, is comprised of both hard and soft components, elastic materials, that are very interesting because they are much more adept at adapting to stress than more rigid physical structures. And I think that this model is really interesting and something that we can learn from. The idea being for the human body that the bones in your body are not simply stacked on top of each other. They are actually floating in your body, and they are held together in place by the soft elastic tissue that is our muscles, our ligaments, our tendons, also known as the fascia network. And so I think we can learn a little bit about how this thing is structured, how we incorporate it in our own bodies, and how we might be able to learn about organizations through this thing. So again, a compression system, a compression structure is much like a brick wall that you see on the left where things are just simply stacked on top of each other. There tends to be a higher pressure in the things that are lower in the system than things that are higher in the system, where a tension structure is much more like a sailboat or like the human body, where you have opposing forces in it, right? So you have the mast that's going up, holding the sail in place, but you also have these cables that are holding the mast in place as well. And so organizations are actually kind of like this, right? Like DAOs, the main value network of DAOs is the connections between its members. It's not necessarily just the individual components, it's how they all connect and they form together. There's often, as we can see in the sailboat example, there's components that seem to act in opposition of each other, right? So you have the thing going up and the cables holding it down. In the human body, we have this as well. We have our biceps and triceps that worked in opposition to each other. If you look at how the human body is operated, you have an ankle that bends one way, a knee that bends the other way, and hips that tend to bend the other way. But this system works together with opposing forces to make a more stable structure. And I think DAOs need this as well. It's not all about having the same vision of the future or the same, value system. It's about having opposing value systems that you can discuss and share together and hopefully build a more vibrant network together. So, one of the things that I think is really interesting when we're talking about humans and we're talking about organizations, especially when we're referencing systems, both the human body and organizations are systems. Systems tend to have two main features. One, that they're a group of interacting or related elements. That's kind of like the interior portion. And then the exterior portion, that they are surrounded and influenced by the environment around them. And if we think about humans, if we look at the elements of the human body, what we actually find is that we're talking about systems within a system. So if we say like the muscles and the organs and the arteries are a part of what makes a human, we're actually talking about circulation system, the digestive system, respiratory system, things of this nature. So we're like this inception of systems where there is a system in a system. And we see the same thing in DAOs, right? Like, what are the main components of a DAO? Well, it's the people within it. We already know that people, humans, are their own living systems. If we're talking about what sort of technology you uses, maybe they are information systems, or maybe they are governance systems, they're governance structures. And so, you know, we kind of have this systematic approach that we need to take, and that's really important because systems are very fascinating in a sense that affecting one part of the system can drastically affect other parts of the system. I think one of the most interesting examples of this were the reintroduction to gray wolves into the Yellowstone National Park. For people who don't know the story, wolves were hunted to extinction in as early as the 1920s, and humans decided to reintroduce them to the park because we as humans eradicated them. It wasn't a natural process. So what we did was we reintroduced about 30 wolves back into the park, and what scientists discovered was that there was a higher biodiversity after wolves were introduced than before, which seems to contradict what we would imagine, considering these are apex predators, top of the food chain. But what happened was the wolves hunted the elk and deer, and the elk and deer were over-proliferated in the area because they didn't have anything to hunt them. When there was less elk and deer, there was more trees that could grow tall. When there was more trees, there was more birds. When there's more birds, they're spreading the seeds everywhere. When there's more trees, there's more beavers to build dams. When the water table rises, there's more fish, there's more bears, and so on and so forth. So you have this cascading effect that happened just because of one small, relatively simple change in the system that scientists at the time couldn't have foresaw happening. So I think that's really interesting when we think about how these elements all relate to each other. And now I want to give a little anecdotal story about when we're talking about the environment, how we're affected by things that are potentially outside the system. So this is a photo of the Biosphere 2. This was a science experiment conducted, I believe, in the 90s by a team that was interested in learning whether they can build an environment in places of extreme conditions or even in other planets to see if they could produce food and provide life in a sustaining way so that humans could then live in these extreme environments. And one of the things that they learned was trees growing inside of this place did not actually live to maturity. They would fall over and die before they started producing fruit. And they didn't understand why. Does anyone want to take a guess? There wasn't wind. There wasn't a stress on the system that could provide the strength for the wood to be able to grow tall and strong. There wasn't anything pressuring it to make its roots grow wider and longer and stronger. And I think this is really interesting to think about because we're in a bear market. It's actually not such a bad thing. This is a unique opportunity to prove that we are capable of handling stress. We are capable of, kind of bringing the vibrancy of life that is a reaction to what's going on around us. So there's this concept of infinite games. All systems, whether they know it or not, are playing the infinite game. The infinite game was introduced by this author, James Cars, in a book called Finite Games and Infinite Games. And it's a separation of the way we view the things that we're doing in our life and whether we're playing things in a finite way or an infinite way. The main difference between these two being the rule sets and the objectives for playing this game. So finite games are things like sports games, debates, eating competitions, things like that, where you tend to play because there is a winner or you want to win, and there is a defined rule set for how you go about playing this game. And it's usually agreed upon ahead of time before the competitors agree to play. Infinite games, on the other hand, may not even have rule sets. There might be natural laws that kind of govern the thing, but there's no referee to blow the whistle on whether something was legal or illegal. And the idea is we should be playing these games to just continue playing them, right? Like, in a good conversation, you want as many people playing as possible to make the conversation as enjoyable for as many people as possible, and to potentially keep playing until you're blue in the face and you can't talk anymore. So things that are infinite games are things like conversations, evolution, and life. I am playing an infinite game trying to solve the problem of my left foot and my discomfort so that I can continue playing the infinite game of life into old age and be happy and vibrant and healthy while doing it. Whether you guys realize it or not, you're all here because we're all cooperating in the infinite game of Web3 and building the future of human organization, right? So, props to you guys for coming out to this, but, that's what we're all here doing. So, the question might be, okay, we're playing an infinite game, so like, what do we do? What's the strategy? How do we go about doing it? I have some insights. I have two that I want to share based on, my progress through this infinite game thus far. The first being understanding historical context. So if you look at the structure of the human body, it's actually a result of how we've used it to function over hundreds of thousands of years, if not millennia. We are primarily walkers, runners, and throwers. And why is that? Because we've done those things over and over and over repeatedly for very long periods of times. We have literally shaped our bodies to be this way by repeatedly doing it over and over. And it's what we are incredibly efficient at. So very often, if people are going back to the gym or they're trying to figure out how to get healthy, one of the things that I've learned is that you need to orient yourself around these functions that are very innate to what we do. A baby doesn't go straight from crawling to running. It needs to go through the walking phase. So what does this mean for organizations? Well, what we might be able to say is, and this is kind of a cliche as a developer, but like, don't decentralize from day one. And that may be very true. We need to understand the historical context that organizations exist in, right? Like, we come from very centralized systems where you're heavily dependent on those in the decision-making sphere to be able to do things that you think are correct or empower you to be able to act in certain ways. And we want to get to this utopic future of decentralized autonomous organizations. But we can't skip those steps. We need to understand that we need to move through this middle ground of getting from point A to point B. And it's important that we acknowledge that. And if we want to build the organizations in the same way that we've built our bodies, we need to have repeatable patterns that we do over and over that are productive and useful for building the future that we want to build. So we might not be able to jump to decentralized right away, but we might be able to slowly start to decentralize decision-making or communication channels or things like that. So that's step one for me. Step two is the concept that we should be focusing on software before hardware. And this idea I've taken from working on my body for a very long period of time. And it's the idea that behavior change is much less metabolically expensive than hardware change. So it is possible to change your body. It is possible to move your bones. It is possible to change your form. But really the only way you can do that is by changing the simple patterns. Simple patterns change muscle density, which then pulls on your bones in different ways, which then creates a new system. And so this is a law that was developed by a German anatomist, where the idea is bones can actually remodel themselves over a period of time based on the load that is applied to it. So if you see people who are mainly sedentary compared to runners or football players, they will have different structures based on how they use their body. Our hip bones might not all be the same. And so it's really fascinating to think about how you might be able to move yourself into the type of form that you want. If you view tennis players, if you take a look at the bones inside of their tennis playing arm, it's thicker than in the bone in their non-tennis playing arm. And that's because the shock waves of repeatedly hitting a tennis ball make it stronger and more dense. And I could say this with a certain degree of assuredness because this is actually a difference in my footprint from 1 year. It's taken a lot of time, it's taken a ton of effort, it's taken repeated activity, it's taken behavior change in order to get there. It's actually quite funny because I didn't know that they would be having real grass on the stage here. But one of my simple behavior changes was wearing less shoes. I needed to develop the strength in my feet to be able to provide an arch for myself. And through testing, I'm now able to see that it's something that I'm capable of doing. I'm getting closer. So if we're talking about software versus hardware, I co-founded a company with a couple friends called Mochi. And the idea is we want to help provide the software to build a better hardware for your DAO or for your remote team. And we work off of these first principles that we cannot build a better DAO without better contributors. Big changes happen because of small, consistent, repeatable action over and over. Goals are achieved by building habits around them and continuously doing them. Members should reflect on their progress. Working in public benefits both the contributor and the DAO, and we have an emphasis on playing as a team. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And members should finally be accountable to themselves and to others. So if this sounds like something that interests you, come talk to me. I'm wearing a Mochi shirt. I'll be around all day. Big hair. Hopefully you can find me. If not, check out our website, mochi.world, to learn more about our system, our game, and come find and chat with us. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come to this talk, or even all of you online streaming. Tomorrow I'm hosting a workshop with Frothy and Kernel, and it's centered around how we make the member experience better in DAOs. So if this is something you want to actively work on and you want to join our design workshop, we'd be happy to have you. And at this point, I want to wish you nothing but the best in the infinite game of life. All the best.